it was like I've never been so in the moment in my life. And I didn't say anything. I just smiled and I watched him run. And then we just continued running. And I don't think I've ever enjoyed any moment in my life so much. I really believe that at that point, I was finally able to be with him and have him feel like he knew I was safe. And I think that at that point, he probably understood that he was never going to have to worry about getting a call that his son had died from a drug overdose. And it was an incredible experience. And yeah, like I said, it's maybe one of the best moments of my life was that one brief moment running over the bridge on Town Lake with my dad was just, and I remember it so clearly, and none of us said anything. It was just this moment of realization that was just unbelievable.
That's Adam Sud, and this is episode 6 of the Bravest Podcast. Hey everybody, I'm Craig, and I have an amazing episode for you today. I recently had an opportunity to catch up with Adam Sud. Now, if you're not familiar with Adam's story, he's currently a health coach based in Austin, Texas for Whole Foods Market, but he didn't start out as the healthy lifestyle advocate you might see online or presenting at events like the Esselstyn's famous gathering Plantstock. Now, this discussion goes deep and wide, and we cover much more than just the topic of diabetes. We talk about reaching breaking points and learning what we as humans are truly capable of. It's about hitting rock bottom so hard that the only choice you have is for your life to come to an end, or you make the decision to recreate yourself from the ground on up, rewriting your brain's operating system in the process. Now, as you'll see, most of our lives might not be as extreme as Adam's. He's had an unbelievable start to his life. But what we can take from this interview and learn from him will help us remove any power our own excuses and mental barriers may hold. We'll also see that improving our situation, whether that's our health or our relationships, is a step-by-step, everyday commitment. There's no easy fix at times, and the reality is that old habits are always lurking in the shadows, regardless how far we've put them in our rearview mirror. Now, in this conversation, Adam takes us on a journey through his childhood in Texas, and then how he rapidly slipped into an Adderall and fast food addiction. Those addictions resulted in Adam spending huge amounts of time on his couch, surrounded by fast food wrappers, devising his next plan to get cash to feed his prescription drug addiction. It was only after he overdosed that Adam sought help from his family and he entered rehab. Now, luckily for Adam, his family's support was there when he needed it the most. Once in rehab, Adam, who was about 300 pounds at that time, was told that he was a type 2 diabetic and that he had dangerously elevated cholesterol and blood pressure levels. He was a ticking time bomb, he was massively sick, and he was emotionally broken. And despite his addiction to Adderall, it was actually the diagnosis of diabetes that helped Adam to flip the switch, that led him to change his relationship with not only food and himself, but it also changed his relationship with his family and his connection to the world around him. This is an emotional interview at times, but there's so much to learn from Adam's story. He's truly a remarkable guy, and in listening to him speak, you cannot help but root for his continued success. Now, I personally love talking with Adam, and I'm very excited to share this episode of the podcast with all of you. So all that said, sit back, relax, and listen to my conversation with Adam Sud. So Adam, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Awesome. So we were introduced by a mutual friend, Cyrus Kambata, and I definitely knew of your story well before Cyrus hooked us up.
Oh,
I can't tell you how happy I am that you're here. And to say that your story has made an impact on me would be a massive understatement. So I'm really looking forward to digging into this with you and for you to share your remarkable journey with everyone who's listening today. So thank you so much for taking the time today, Adam.
yeah, no, my pleasure. I appreciate everything you just said. So, I'm a pretty modest guy, so when I hear stuff like that, I just take it, and say thank you.
I can really appreciate that. But in all honesty, you've made a massive impact so far, and I'm sure that you're going to be making more of an impact as time goes forward.
Thank you.
So maybe look, there's you've been on a number of different podcasts. You've been interviewed. You've been doing presentations associated with a lot of pretty well-known seminars and gatherings all over the country. Some people might know your story, but what I'd really love to do is maybe start back at the beginning.
Yeah,
Your family and you're originally from Texas, right?
that's right. Yeah, seventh generation Texan and Jew. So I like to say that I grew up eating burgers and barbecue and bagels and blintzes, the standard American diet, wearing cowboy boots with a little bit of chutzpah.
That's so great. So seventh generation Texan. What was your childhood like there?
I mean, honestly, it was very much, a TV show childhood. I mean, I had a great childhood. I grew up in a neighborhood with all my friends. We rode our bikes to and from school. I grew up in the 80s. I was born in 82. And so, late 80s, early 90s was when you played outside every day after school until your mom called you in for dinner. And on the weekends, you played outside until she counted to three. That's how it was. And I really, I played sports. I was a very active kid, and I loved my childhood. So, but I grew up in Texas, and I grew up eating the standard American diet, but that was what, no one thought that anything was wrong with that.
Sure.
So, and I certainly didn't. I felt healthy. I was active. I had a great childhood. So I
So
didn't think. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, so you said you're an active kid. Did you play football? Because Texas is kind of known for football, right?
Yeah, Texas is known for football. I played Little League baseball. I played basketball. I played football. I skateboarded. I did martial arts. I did anything that would, any. I was interested in all sports and all activities, but yeah, football. Football is a big deal in Texas. I wasn't, I'm not the biggest guy, so when I got into high school, football wasn't in it for me, but I did play through middle school.
Sure. Now you have brothers and sisters,
Yeah, I have a twin brother and a younger sister.
and were they pretty active as well?
My brother was. My sister, she wasn't the most coordinated kid growing up, but she did dance and gymnastics and things like that until she realized that maybe that it wasn't in her future. But yeah, so my brother and I, we did everything together.
Sure. So was you mentioned that your family Texans and also Jewish, and that nice interesting mix of foods that might be found in the house. Were your parents healthy eaters?
Yeah, I mean, so they believe they were. My dad been a marathoner since college. Before that, he was captain of the high school basketball team. He stressed the importance of being aware of what you put into your body. He lost his father when he was young, at age 25 to cancer. So I never knew my grandfather. And because of that, my dad has always been very strict and grips the wheel pretty tightly when it comes to what you should be putting in your body. But unfortunately, that message kind of got misinterpreted when I was young, and I really believe that I started to become a closet eater at a very young age. So a few mornings a week, my mom would make cinnamon rolls for breakfast. The kind that like you twist the can and it would like pop open, and then you put Anyways,
Yeah, I remember that sound from when I was a kid also. It makes, yeah, it makes
yeah,
your ears perk up.
yeah, exactly. And we were allowed to have one, and I remember very clearly, I would watch my mom turn around and go back into the kitchen to start cleaning up, and I would grab two of them and put them in my pocket, and then go into my bedroom and eat them, alone. And I think that that's, the reason I was doing that is because I didn't want to be caught, one, and I was ashamed. And I think that that's where I started to develop this sort of unhealthy relationship when it comes to food, that I had to hide what I really wanted, because if I got caught, then I believe that they would feel that I wasn't okay, that I was a bad person for wanting to do those things, when really it was more about the behavior.
Sure.
Um,
So your dad had this underlying desire to make sure that everyone around him was as healthy as possible because of his
yeah,
experience with his dad. And I guess, look, anybody would have a potential fear of losing someone after they've lost a parent at such a young age. And the other part of this is that, and I'm not sure if you want to talk about this, but your dad has had a connection with a pretty well-known story in the health and wellness space as well, that to a
yeah,
certain extent defines who he is on one level, right?
yeah, very much.
Maybe you could share a little bit about that.
Sure. So my dad is one of the original founding investors of Whole Foods Market. My dad and John Mackey been friends since they played basketball in high school together. And he's currently a top level executive at Whole Foods Market. And so yeah, there was this. It's interesting because he got. I think that in some way I resented and sort of rebelled against him in terms of the way I ate. Maybe, I don't know. It seems logical that that's exactly what happened, or partly what happened. But yeah, he's been, Whole Foods Market is something that he's been a part of since it was Safer Way.
Interesting.
And I'm very proud of it. I'm proud of what he's accomplished, and what Whole Foods Market is today. But, I also know that growing up, it was like, can I not be known as the son of Jim Sud for like 5 seconds? um, but yeah, so I think that is partly one of the reasons why I may have gone so far to the other end of the spectrum later on.
Yeah, we'll talk about that also because
Yeah.
everything kind of has a tendency to come full circle in life, right?
Yeah.
And that relationship that you're describing with your dad earlier on, or at least with the kind of the underlying tone of it, it's interesting how later in your story everything kind of comes full circle, where it probably brought you guys closer together than ever, right?
Oh, absolutely. The thing is that right now I'm making it sound like he was this, very overbearing person, but really it was more of a miscommunication and misunderstanding on both sides. So what he was doing when he was saying, "Oh, that's not okay. Don't eat this. Don't eat that," was when he becomes fearful, like you mentioned, when someone loses somebody very dear to them, and it affects them in a traumatic way, that a lot of times some people break closed, in my opinion, and some people break open, right? So some people become very emotionally shut off. Some people become very emotionally open. I believe my dad became more of an emotionally closed type of person as a result of it. And therefore, in order to say that I love you and I'm afraid, he does it in a very controlling manner. So when he was controlling of the way I ate and the things that I did, that was his way of saying, I love you, I'm afraid of the behavior. And as a kid who's 10, I misinterpreted that as, I'm afraid and I'm not okay with who you are right now. But to know neither, it was, at no fault of either one of us. It was just, that's all we knew how to do. That's the only way I knew to understand it as a kid. And that's the only way he was capable of expressing his love and his fear of watching me do these things that he saw in a person that he loved and then lost.
Sure. So another thing that kind of popped up in childhood was this concept of ADHD.
Yeah.
When
I'm an 80s kid.
Yeah. When were you? When did they have these first kind of inklings that this might be something that's impacting you? How were you first diagnosed?
Yeah.
How did that come about?
So I think in fifth grade, going into middle school, I went to a private Jewish day school. It's very structured. And I am a person who doesn't like to just accept things as they are because someone says that's the way they are. I want to know why they are that way and
Which is
why.
a great trait.
I believe so. So I was very rebellious in a way that I questioned everything.
Yep.
Not for the sake of just being sort of this rebellious, kid, but really it's like it can't be just because you say so. It can't, and that can't be the only logical way to the correct answer. That can't be the only logical explanation. Why is it or only one type of thing? And so, I started to act out in class, that kind of thing. I didn't like to do the traditional homework type of stuff. I didn't fit into this mastery learning where it's like, here's the workload, do the answers, turn it in, get an A, and then you're a good student.
I would argue that most kids don't fit into that pattern, though.
Yeah, well, and most kids, I've actually learned a lot on the science behind how people learn from actually Jane Esselstyn's husband, Brian Hart, who's just mastered in education and is an educator, and he's talking about there are mastery learners, and then there's like 3 other types of learning, and nobody's just one of each of those things. Most people are combination, but majority one. And so obviously, I was having trouble in school with acting out, talking a lot in class, not, just doing what was told. And so I went and got tested. And, look, I didn't know what was going on. I just went with my parents to this doctor. They put these things on my head and, they tested me and they're like, oh, he's got ADHD or whatever. And I ended up being prescribed Ritalin at the time. This was probably 1991 probably 91 or 92. And that was common then. I mean, that's when everyone was being put on this stuff. So I was 10. Maybe 93. And here's the thing. All right. So I already have this situation with my parents and the way that they're explaining to me the problem with the way I eat and it being this miscommunication. Now I have a doctor who's saying that I'm not normal. Not in those exact words, but there's something about me that isn't the way society wants it to be. Here's this pill and it's going to fix it. All right. So from that point on, I think that it impacted me in a way to where when I see something about myself that the world doesn't think is okay, I need to look for an outside substance to fix it. And so there was a good period of my life where I was constantly being told or felt like I was being told that you're not okay. You're doing things that aren't normal because you're not okay. Instead of it being explained that, okay, the reason you're doing these things, the reason we're upset isn't because of who you are as a person, or the reason we're concerned isn't because of who you are as a person. It's simply the behavior that we're seeing, and we want to help you possibly change those behaviors because it scares us. And I think that if it was explained to me in that way, I wouldn't have taken things so personally.
Sure.
Ritalin was a big deal then. Obviously, it had just come out, and I think every kid in America pretty much got on it within the next 10 years.
Do you think it helped you?
Honestly, I don't know. I know I didn't like taking it because I was being told to take it.
Yeah.
And I think it was such a low dose that I don't, and as a kid, I was being, I don't know if it helped or not. I know I took it every day, but I don't think I noticed any change in my behavior as a result of taking it.
Sure.
But in high school, it got switched to Adderall because Adderall came out and that was the new version of Ritalin. And Adderall, as we'll talk about later, became something very, very important in my life.
Yeah, so let's actually talk about that because
Sure.
your meds are switched to the newer version, the latest and the greatest of what was required, quote unquote, for your needs at that point, and you were taking the medication as prescribed
Until I get a call from a friend of mine,
it's always a
who,
friend.
it's not their fault, but and I've never said who it was, and I won't. Um, and invites me to this big weekend party. I think I'm a sophomore in high school, and you know, like I was a very big procrastinator, so I had a lot of work to catch up on. And I said, I can't. And they said, well, don't you take Adderall? And I told them, of course, yeah, I take Adderall. So what? Well, don't you know that if you take a bunch of Adderall, that you could come to the party and stay up all night on Sunday and get all your work done? And I said, no, I didn't know that. Well, okay, great. So I'll come to the party. And then I just figured, well, if it helps you stay up all night, why don't I just bring some to the party? I could stay up all night at the party. And, anyways, took more Adderall than prescribed. And man, I friggin' loved it. It is this incredible feeling of just like having your brains on steroids. You just want to have anybody sit in front of you and just have them let you spill all of your knowledge onto them for hours at a time. And it was I felt like it finally made me the person that everyone else wanted me to be. Yeah, I think that I was able to stay up as long as I wanted. I was able to get all my work done. I was, the life of the party because I had energy. I wanted to talk to everybody. I wanted to keep going and going and going and going and going. I was slightly overweight in high school. And the great thing about Adderall is that it's an amphetamine. So I didn't want to eat. And now, remember, I'm a sophomore in high school. So the way that people think of me, one, has already been an issue growing up. Two, now it really matters to me in the terms of, oh, I want girls to notice me, and they're not going to notice me as much if I'm overweight. Adderall is going to fix that. It's going to make me the hardworking person that the school wants me to be. It's going to fix everything for me.
It's a solution to all your problems. Yeah.
Solution to all my problems. And, like I mentioned, I had already sort of come into this understanding that when I see things that aren't right with me, I need to look for an outside source to fix it. That has been what I've been taught for so long. And here was a substance that was going to fix everything. So, man, I just got hooked. And I was an addict in high school.
So what was the recommended dose that you were supposed to be taking at that point? And then what were you taking, say, as you start to head off to college?
Yeah, so the recommended dose is 20 to 40 milligrams. It's your average prescription amount. By the time I went off to college, I was probably taking 80 milligrams a day, maybe 100 at the most, which isn't unheard of. It's not that bad, because the drug was working for me. It really was. I was getting my work done. I wasn't going to class. I had 64 unexcused absences my senior year that I had to make up. But I got all my work done, and I got a scholarship to the school that I wanted to go to for my art portfolio. And, everything was working. I had friends, I had girlfriends, I was thin, I looked healthy. It was like my life had finally become what I wanted it to be, what everyone else wanted it to be, what it needed to be. Thank you so much, Adderall, So when I went off to college, unfortunately, when you've been addicted to something for long enough, it stops working. And you have to take more and more of it. And my need for it became more important than my need to focus on my schoolwork, focus on my, my desires, my passions in life, and started buying more Adderall from friends because my prescriptions would certainly dry up very quickly. And to the point to where my schoolwork didn't matter anymore. And at this time, over the summer of my sophomore year, I landed a job working on a film with Luke and Owen Wilson and Will Ferrell and Eva Mendes and Harry Dean Stanton and Chris Christopherson. This really cool film, indie film being filmed back in Austin, Texas, called The Wendell Baker Story. that Luke and his older brother Andrew directed. And I said, all right, great. I'm going to work on this movie. And I had an opportunity to stay in Austin and continue working in the film industry. So I dropped out of school. And I told my parents, I was like, look, I got this opportunity to work in film with this, these really cool people. I'm just going to, put off school. But really what I was doing is I was dropping out because I had an opportunity to stay in Austin, have money, and be where all my dealers were. And I knew all the doctors in Austin that I could scam. And so this is where my life really started to go downhill because I started doctor shopping, which is where you have multiple doctors prescribing you the same medications without them knowing about each other. I started doing some really, really shady things. And what's interesting is that when I went off to college, I had no intention of ever becoming a criminal drug addict. But within 2 years of starting college, that's exactly what I was. I was scamming doctors. I was forging prescriptions or altering prescriptions. I was buying from some really shady people on the street. I was stealing from people in order to get money for drugs. I'd stopped talking to my family, stopped talking to my friends. Of course, I lost my second job after that film because I started to put on a lot of weight because the Adderall had really at this point destroyed my metabolism. And I was never able to take enough to feel good about myself. And so I started to develop an addiction to fast food because it was easy. It was right there. It was something that was going to emotionally soothe me and sort of put me in a food coma until I could, just sort of pass the day away until I could get more drugs.
Could you describe maybe a typical day at that point in your life?
Yeah. So I would wake up and I would go to Torchy's Tacos, which is a breakfast taco place in Austin, and I would get 4 to 6 potato, egg, and cheese breakfast tacos with a soda. And then for my first lunch, I would go to McDonald's and get 2 supersized double quarter pounder meals. And then for my second lunch, I would go to Whataburger, which is a fast food chain in Texas, and get the extra large honey barbecue chicken strip sandwich meal. And then for dinner, I would get an extra large pizza from Papa John's with sausage on it, with a 2-liter soda. Then I would go back to McDonald's for the double quarter pounder meal, supersized, of course. And then at around 2 in the morning, go back to Whataburger for their breakfast on a bun sandwiches, 6 of them. During the course of 24 hours, or during the course of the day, probably drink 15 to 20 sodas. And at this point, my addiction had become so intense that over the course of 24 hours, I was taking 450 milligrams of Adderall.
Wow.
I started living like a hoarder. I wasn't, taking showers. I would take a shower like once a month. I smelled really bad, and, it was a very rough time.
What was your weight like at that point?
I think I stopped weighing myself at about 280 pounds, but I know that I got above 320 at one point. So it was anywhere between 320 and 350 pounds. This is probably around 2008. And like I said, I'd avoided my family entirely, except I was really treating my parents like an ATM. I would do just enough to stay connected with them so that I could keep borrowing money. And okay, so here's an example of how I felt about my parents. And I really don't. I'm very ashamed of ever thinking and feeling this way. But I want it to be very clear that this, when you hear this really does help you understand what it's like to be, or what I was like when I was a drug addict, because I'm very ashamed of ever feeling this way, but it's true. I would, be up for 6 days at a time, laying in my living room surrounded by fast food garbage. And I would have these thoughts like, all right, so you're a college dropout, drug addict, fat guy who smells and who's basically got nothing, because I was spending all of my inheritance on drugs. You're never going to make anything of yourself, right? But at least when your parents die, you're going to get their money. So to say I was a selfish person is an understatement. And I really am, like, I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself for thinking that way. But I think it's important to understand that that's how far my lifestyle pushed me in terms of the type of person that I was. And still, even though treating my parents this way and getting into these horrible fights with my dad and my mom being caught in the middle of it, it was in 2009 or 2010 that Whole Foods Market partnered with Rip Esselstyn and Engine 2 and created these total health immersion programs. And, my dad is, he's one of the most incredible people, and, he's never going to let an opportunity go by that could help his son. And he came to me and he said, Adam, Whole Foods is doing this thing with Rip Esselstyn, and it's this total health immersion program. And, normally you can't go unless you're a team member of Whole Foods Market, but I can get you in and I'd really like you to go. Will you please go? Now, I went because I felt that if I said yes, he would be like, all right, he really wants to change his life, and I could keep getting money from him. That's why I went. And I was a drug addict at the immersion. And when I say I was a drug addict at the immersion, so I got a private room. Thankfully for everyone else, I got a private room because it wouldn't have been fair for anyone to share a room with me. When I say I was a drug addict at the immersion, so it's a hotel resort, right, in Austin. This is when it was being done in Austin. On the desk in my room, I had all my drugs laid out for the day, for each day, the amount of drugs that I would be doing. So I was a wreck, but I went to every single lecture and I listened to everything that was being said, and it all made sense. And on the last night, or the second to last night of the immersion, they had a speaker come and talk to us, and his name is Dick Beardsley. This guy is one of the greatest marathoners in the world. He's no longer running anymore, but he is a former world record holder. And he talked about his life after being a marathoner. He had suffered a series of some very, very horrific accidents. He talked about getting caught up in the machinery at his farm and just getting tossed through this machinery, and ended up addicted to painkillers. And I sat there and I listened to this guy talk about his life as an addict, talk about the way he treated people, and talk about, the way he thought about himself. And I sat there and I was like, this guy's talking about me. And I realized at that point that, my issues in life were really serious, and could I please just muster up the courage to walk up to this guy and say, I don't know how to live, man. I'm a drug addict and I'm really scared, and my parents think that it's the food, and maybe partly it is, but I just don't know what I'm doing. And oh man, I don't know why I didn't. It's like one of those moments where you're sitting there and you're like standing up to go do it, but then something holds you down. And unfortunately I didn't. And I guess I wasn't desperate enough. But I really wish I had, because I say I wish I had, but at the same time, I think that what happened to me a year later was necessary. Because a year later I'm sitting in my apartment, and, people ask me if this was a suicide attempt, and I don't think, I'm actually pretty sure I know it wasn't a conscious suicide attempt. I wasn't popping extra pills for the attempt to kill myself. But I know that the way I was living at the time, every single day of my life was essentially a suicide attempt, because I knew that every single day I could possibly die from my lifestyle. But I'm popping pill after pill, and I'd pushed my body pretty far in terms of the amount of drugs I took. So I knew what it felt like to be like, whoa, dude, you're on a lot. Like, just sit down, lay back. You gotta lay this one out. But this feeling was a little more intense, and I started to get really dizzy. My heart really started to race. So normally when you're on about 120 milligrams of Adderall, because that's what I was doing. I was doing 120 milligrams at a time. Your heart rate is pretty high, but this felt wrong, and so I popped some painkillers to try and bring me down. And something felt wrong, and I tried to stand up. I tried to stand up because I was like, all right, just stand up. Maybe it's just something you just need to stand up, get centered. And as I stood up, I threw up, and then the next thing I know, or the next thing that I remember is waking up on the floor because I'd suffered an overdose. And according to, because I drove myself to an urgent care clinic, and they said that sounds like you had an overdose. We can tell you this for sure, that had you fallen backwards instead of forwards with the amount that you threw up, you probably wouldn't be alive right now because you would have aspirated and choked. You need to talk to somebody. And I said, it was a one-time, I played it off like it was a one-time thing. Some friend of mine had given me Adderall to try and help me get through some work. And I think they gave me a bunch, and I was supposed to take a little at a time, but I took it all at once. I didn't know what I was doing. And they, I don't think they 100% believed me, but they let it go.
Yeah, so you're playing the denial game right until the end here.
Oh yeah. But I knew, see, now the reason why I was doing that was because it would be their obligation to 5150 me, which is, okay, this is more than likely a suicide attempt. We have to have him held under watch for 72 hours. I didn't want that happening. So I really played it off like this was, guys, listen, I'm not a drug addict. All right. This was, someone gave me some, I didn't know how much I was supposed to take, and it was an accident. But I drove home, and, I thought about, like, less than an hour ago or less than 2 hours ago, I was lying on the floor in this apartment, surrounded by fast food garbage, surrounded by empty pill bottles, dying at the age of 30 from drug addiction, from fast food addiction, from absolutely no passion in life. And, I had this realization that, if I keep this up, my parents are going to one day be spending the rest of their lives asking themselves what they could have or should have done to stop their son from eating and drugging himself to death. And as an addict, I know that there's nothing that they could have ever said or done to make me want to change. That unless I wanted to change, that was never going to happen. But I also know that because they're not addicts, they don't know that. See, unfortunately, most people who are dealing with someone that they love who's an addict think that you want to believe that there's something you can do or say that's going to be that magic switch for them. And unfortunately, you can always be there for somebody, but you can't want it for them. And I knew that they would be struggling with that, and they'd be feeling guilty about it the rest of their lives. I have a twin brother who means the world to me, and to say that I was fair to him as an addict is not. I stole from him, and I treated him very poorly, and I didn't want him to believe that I killed myself because of how close we were and are. And I knew that at that point in his life, he was dealing with a lot of depression himself. And if he thought I killed myself, he would most likely attempt the same thing.
But you gave your family an opportunity to help you.
Yeah, I picked up the phone, and I called my parents, and I just said I need help, right? And remember the way I used to treat my parents, without question, without judgment. It was like they'd gotten the call they'd been waiting for so long. They said, "Don't worry about it. Will you just come home and stay at the house?" And I said, "Sure." And they're like, "Just, don't worry about it. Just grab a few clothes, lock up the door. Don't worry. Just come home." And 2 weeks later, they took me to check myself into rehab. And it was funny at the time because I called my brother to tell him that I was going to rehab, and he goes, "Why? For Adderall?" And I said, "No, I'm going for depression. even at that point, even after an overdose, I wasn't ready to admit to everyone that I was a drug addict.
Sure.
And he didn't know about the overdose. He didn't actually know about the overdose till last year, because I wasn't ready to be open about it. And it was a surreal thing walking into rehab with my dad, knowing that from that point on, things were either going to get worse or they were going to get better.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because that's what you've provided to your parents is the opportunity to really help you in ways that no one else could have ever helped you.
Right.
And maybe you could describe for me, first of all, thank you so much for just really highlighting and detailing everything that you've gone through. I'm watching your face, and it's clear that you've been to places that have deeply impacted you, deeply impacted your family. And I'm so happy to see you on this side of that story. But maybe you can talk to me a little bit about, okay, so there's a wonderful picture that I saw. You had a presentation, I think it was at Plantstock, where you had this wonderful picture of your dad walking you into rehab.
Yeah.
And for me personally, that set off a massive emotional response for me, because I look at myself, being a father, knowing what your dad probably was, or thinking about what your dad possibly was going through at that point in time. What was it like having your dad walk in there, and what was the first day or two in that rehab center like for you?
Oh God. Okay, so I know I couldn't have gotten myself into rehab if my dad and my mom weren't there. I don't think I would have had the courage to do it. And I think that they recognized it, because when they flew me out to Arizona, we stayed at this like really upscale Hilton resort thing in Tucson, and they're like, we're gonna get you a bungalow, you're gonna have your own like little house, so be very comfortable, okay? And they walked me in. It was very surreal. You go to the gate, you gotta press this button, you call the front desk manager, they ask you who you are, why you're there. And I'd already called a few weeks before to set up my intake. And it was like, when that gate opens, like I have no idea. And I'm a person who's very much afraid of the unknown. I think a lot of people are, obviously, but I get a lot of anxiety about it. You walk in, and right when you get to the front desk, you got to surrender your phone. You got to surrender, anything that has like camera technology on it or whatever. And that's as far as my parents could go. And then the nurse tech comes out and was like, all right, we're going to take you back to something called MAS. I really don't know what MAS stands for, but I know what it is. It's a detox area. It's more of like a medical detox area where you're going to stay for a minimum of 24 hours. They got to find out how addicted you are, whether you're going to go into withdrawals, and if you go into withdrawals, you can stay up. I mean, people stay there for up to a month, and just in MAS. That's not even going into rehab. So I get in, and what they do is, when you do your initial intake, they take you into your bedroom. They have you open up all your belongings. They search your belongings. They search you. They have you stripped naked. They do a full body check. Which was very uncomfortable for me. At the time, I was a very self-conscious person. I was somewhere between 320 and 350. I had a female nurse tech looking me over. And I didn't know at the time that I was a type 2 diabetic, but I had all these like cuts and like bug bites on my leg that hadn't healed because of it. And they were like, what's all this about? And I was like, I don't know, and they were getting all concerned, and it made me feel like a criminal. They wanted it's for your protection and the protection of everyone else. They want to make sure you're safe. They want to make sure you're not bringing anything in with you that you're not supposed to. They want to know if you're high, because a lot of people don't go to rehab sober, and I wasn't sober. I said, yeah, I'm on a lot right now, and I wouldn't be able to walk in the door if I wasn't. And then they take you to a doctor's office where they do blood tests and all this stuff. So the day is a lot of poking and prodding. It's very invasive. And I was already uncomfortable and had a guard up. And so this was like, they were just jabbing at that guard, and it was rough. And then the following morning, I got a call that the doctor wanted to talk to me. And I walked into the doctor's office, and he said, Adam, how come you didn't list on your intake form, your medical intake form, that you are a type 2 diabetic and that you have high blood pressure and high cholesterol. And I hadn't seen a doctor in probably 5 years. So I literally said to him, because I'm not, it speaks to the ego of someone who eats, 10 cheeseburgers a day and does, massive amounts of drugs, who believes himself to be completely healthy. And he said, well, I need you to sit down because we have to talk about some things. Your fasting blood sugar is about 400. So where that ranks on it. So have you heard of the term, your A1C?
Of course.
So the A1C protein is a protein in the blood that allows us to get an idea of your average glucose and average blood sugar number over the course of 3 months, because it exists in the blood for 3 months. So an A1C of 4 to 5.6 is normal. 5.6 to 6.4 is pre-diabetic. Anything over 6.4 is type 2 diabetic. A fasting blood sugar of 400 is a 12.
Wow.
And he said, your blood pressure was so high. Now, we understand that you were probably very anxious when you came in, but your blood pressure was like 200 over 110. That's like, and your heart rate, I think my heart rate was like 130. Look, for your safety, we're going to be monitoring your blood pressure and your heart rate every morning, and we won't let you go to breakfast until your heart rate is at least 110 or lower.
So you're a ticking time bomb at this point. You didn't even realize it.
Didn't even realize it.
Yeah.
I know that I had times where my heart was like really pounding in my chest, and I would get sort of nauseous, and I don't know. I thought it was just because I was on a lot of drugs. It might have been because I was, literally on the verge of having a heart attack. But I remember being incredibly ashamed of myself, because I had attended this Engine to Immersion with Rip Esselstyn, where they teach you that chronic Western disease is 100% your fault. If you have heart disease, if you have type 2 diabetes, it is not because of your genetics. It is because of the lifestyle you live. And I walked out of the doctor's office and I said, just so you know, I'm not going to any of my therapy sessions today. I've had enough. And he said, all right, I understand, but you can't leave your dorm rooms, the dormitory, because this place was set up like a campus, if you're going to do that. And he's like, I'll call your therapist and let him know. And I went in the dorm and I picked up the phone and I called my dad. And I said, I don't know what to tell you, but I'm a diabetic and I have some pretty bad heart disease. And his response to this day, I think, is maybe the most brilliant thing he's ever said in terms of his relationship with me. Because he said, so, all right, Adam, let's just say that you are a diabetic and that you have heart disease. Let's just say it, right? For example, I'm not saying that you do. Let's just say, let's say that you do, which means I might not. You, at the Engine to Immersion, didn't they teach you that you can reverse this? All you have to do is change your diet. And I said, yeah. He goes, so then this isn't a problem, right? This is just something that needs to be fixed. If it were a problem, then, that would mean that you are not in control of it. But you are in control of it, so it's not a problem. And at that moment, he stopped being my adversary and he became my ally in my eyes.
Amazing.
Because he stopped talking to me like there was a problem with me that needed to be fixed. He started talking about my behavior for the first time. He said, you know what the problem is? It's the way you eat. It's not you. It's the way you eat. And
so did that flip a switch for you?
Oh, my God. I remember thinking, what my dad just told me is that if I'm the problem, I get to be the solution. And that moment, I decided that my recovery was going to be reversing these diseases. And the great thing about it was, in order to do that, I have to stay sober. Because with addiction and depression and anxiety and all these things, there's no number on a scale, right? I can't prick my finger every day and find out where I land on the addiction scale or where I land on the depression scale. It's not trackable. And unfortunately, rehab is not really where the change happens. That's where they help you understand what you have to deal with and help you create a path towards recovery that you will start when you leave. It's really helping you accept your issues and understand them so that you can move forward to create a plan of recovery. But the great thing about with chronic disease is that it's all measurable, right? I can get up every morning and I can weigh myself. I can get up every morning, I can check my blood pressure. I can check my blood sugar. I can see the exact results of the work I was putting in. And that's important to me. So I made it my mission to go 100% plant-based. Now in recovery, I mean, in rehab, not going to happen.
Yeah, let's talk about that transition in a second, but I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
What was harder to kick? Was it the Adderall or the fast food?
Um, because I was in rehab, honestly, the fast food.
Yeah.
Because I left rehab and went into sober living, and in sober living they drug test you. You know, you're in a controlled environment. It's not like I had the opportunity to get it as easily as I wanted to go get fast food. Like if I wanted to go get fast food, I could go get fast food. It's not illegal. It's not against the rules to eat crap food in recovery.
Sure.
It's not. It's completely fine. Um, but they were going to test me every week for drugs, and if I got busted, I'd be kicked out, and then I'd be out on the streets.
Sure. So you moved into sober living and you're being tested, and what kind of foods are you eating in sober living? Because I'm guessing that they're not going to Whole Foods to shop for you every other day, right?
Yeah. So I walked into sober living, and it looked like a teenager from the '90s who'd been watching nothing but Nickelodeon commercials had stocked this kitchen. It was Totino's pizza rolls and tombstone pizzas and microwavable waffles and sodas and sugary cereal and all the dairy you can imagine. And I remember thinking to myself that I can leave here sober. Absolutely, I can do that. 3 months, a year, however long I stay, I can leave sober. But if I eat these foods, I'll never leave healthier. And remember, my goal was I wasn't going to focus on the addiction and the depression. I was going to focus on reversing the disease, because that was a serious threat to my health, and that was something that I knew I could measure on my own. And with therapy, you could be going through therapy for 2 weeks, and at the end of 2 weeks feel worse than you did when you started, and the doctors are telling you, the therapist is saying, "Oh, you're making such great progress." And you just have to look at them and go, "Okay, well, I'll just take your word for it because I feel like shit." And I walked up to the house manager, whose name was literally Hamburger. Serious.
You couldn't write a better story.
And I said, "Look, I need some help here. I'm trying to do a plant-based diet. I can't eat any of these foods. What can we do here?" And he goes, "Well, Adam, what do you need to be successful? You tell me, because I don't know anything about a plant-based diet. What do you need to be successful? Let's help you do that." Now, for the first month, there was only a certain level of discomfort that I was able to handle, and I hadn't ever eaten a plant-based diet. So they had these egg whites that were there, and I used egg whites to create these massive veggie omelets that I would cook without oil in order to get a taste for the foods. And then from that, I was able to switch to a completely plant-based diet based on black beans, broccoli, oatmeal, and fruit. And so that's what I literally ate every single day for every single meal for the remainder of the 10 months.
For 10 months?
For 10 months, I was in sober living, yeah.
Wow.
And now, I mean, honestly, I wouldn't, recommend anyone doing egg whites but for me at the time, I was having to give up drugs. I was having to do 5 hours of therapy a day. This was allowing me to get the foods into my body.
But it speaks to that concept of a transition also. It's very hard for most people to just completely go cold turkey on anything,
Right.
especially when it comes to food, and just completely change their diet overnight, unless there's a real specific health reason that serves as the catalyst to do that. But for most of us, it is a transition over time from unhealthy to healthy.
So it enabled me to get the foods into my body and then realize that, all right, so the egg whites are probably making up 10% of my calories. And after so many months, there was a lot of things that happened. I realized that this is ridiculous. I'm just going to switch to the plant-based diet entirely. But at first, it was really difficult. I was crying a lot. I was angry a lot. If you had met me then, you wouldn't like me. I'll tell you that much. And I sat there and I was, waking up every day and going over and over this problem in my head that if I know that this is the right thing to do, why is it so difficult for me to want to do it? And that's a question that Doug Lisle answers very plainly in his book, The Pleasure Trap.
Yep.
And luckily, I stumbled upon his YouTube video of his TED Talk about the pleasure trap. And when I saw that, I realized that there's one thing I need to do every single day in order to be successful. I have to get up every single day and I have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. If I can do that, I'll be successful. And it wasn't like I'm going to wake up, all right, so if today's uncomfortable, then I'll deal with it. No, I have to wake up and I have to plan on being comfortable with being uncomfortable every single day, because only in those moments is my life changing. If it's easy, then there's no change happening whatsoever. If I'm waking up every single day and my lifestyle is causing frustration and it's causing me to get irritated and angry, good. That means nothing is the same. That means everything is changing. That's what I was hoping for. And, within 2 months, my heart disease and diabetes were completely gone. I remember my blood sugar dropping into the 60s at about six weeks into it, and feeling so bad, I just ditched my meds because they had me taking, I was on 8 prescription medications for chronic disease, behavior, and mood disorder when I left rehab. They had me on the highest amount of metformin that you can give somebody before they put you on insulin. And so I'm lowering my blood sugar with a plant-based diet and then artificially lowering it with a massive amount of metformin. My blood sugar was dropping way too low. So I just stopped taking the metformin without consulting a doctor. And the great thing was, about 2 weeks later, I went to my endocrinologist, and he thought the blood sugar readings that he was seeing were a result of the metformin. And I got to tell him, I said, no, man, it's because I haven't been taking the medicine. He said, he looks at me with this shocked look on his face. What do you mean you haven't been taking the medication? And I told him that I'd switched to a plant-based diet, and he said, well, you know what, actually that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I'm sure his reaction is simply because the vast majority of people that the endocrinologist is seeing on a day-to-day basis is not changing their outcomes through lifestyle changes.
Right.
They're expecting the change to occur through the medication that they're taking.
Yeah. The other thing is so let's say you were to treat somebody with an A1C of 12 with metformin, it's not going to get their blood sugar low enough to be healthy. Yeah. To get a blood sugar reading of 80 when a person has an A1C of 12 would be unreal with metformin. And so he was shocked, and I told him I'd switch to a plant-based diet, and he looked at me and he said that makes sense. And I wanted to get a little upset with him, because clearly this guy had an understanding that a plant-based diet can help with diabetes. And I was thinking to myself, well, why wouldn't he recommend it? People have asked me, were you upset? And at the time, honestly, it didn't even occur to me to get upset, because I thought, who was he dealing with when he met me? Right? This angry, entitled, arrogant, spoiled drug addict, 350-pound, mess of a life. Maybe at that point, for him, the safest thing was get him on the medication. Let's try to get him some sort of stability with medication, and then recommend the changes later. But the best thing was I got to stand up and tell him that, looks like I no longer need your services. Thank you for everything you've done, and walk out and feel something that I hadn't felt in a long time.
That's so awesome. Yeah, that's so
just
awesome.
Self-worth. I finally felt self-worth for the first time in a long time. And that self-worth made me feel like everything I was going to experience in the future was worth going through. All the frustration, all the difficulty in the road ahead. Because remember, at this point, I'm only 2 months into my recovery, was going to be worth it, because the work that I'm putting into myself is working.
Sure.
And it made me feel like I was worth saving.
That's awesome. So this is clearly a period in your life when you basically just dropped everything. You're focusing on getting well. The choice for you really was a simple choice. It was either I'm going to live or I'm going to die at that point, yeah. Right? Now, most people who are listening probably won't hit that inflection point necessarily in their lives, but we do have to make similar choices about how we want to live our lives each and every day. Mm-hmm. We have to ask ourselves, do we want to take the time and the energy we need to get healthy? But sometimes in doing so, we believe that we're neglecting our day-to-day responsibilities to other people in our lives. Yeah. I'd love for you to talk to me a little bit about this concept of being selfish versus self-care.
Right. So I would say that self-care is the best form of being selfish, because I was of service to no one at 350 pounds. So me being selfish at that point and taking care of myself was the best thing I could have done for anybody else that I ever wanted to help in the future. If you are not there 100%, if you cannot show up as your authentic self or as close to it on a daily basis, then you can never be of complete service to other people. there's nothing wrong with taking time in your day to say that I need to care for myself so that I can care for others, or just to say I want to make sure that I'm okay. I'm going to take some time and take care of myself. You know, that's normal. I think that in doing so, in learning to care for yourself, you can learn to care for others better.
No doubt, no doubt. So at that point, you're successfully off of all the meds that were prescribed for you.
Yeah, I got off all the meds within a year
That's so
because
good.
the antidepressants and the mood stabilizers, you have to titrate off slowly.
Yep.
And I really want to stress that for anybody who's listening that is considering adopting a plant-based diet for the improvement of mental health, which it does do. But you need to have a plan with your prescribing doctor who will monitor your changes as you titrate off slowly, because it's very dangerous to just say, oh, I'm on a plant-based diet, I'm going to give up the antidepressants. Don't do that.
No doubt. So if we can fast forward just a little bit, you had a tremendous amount of experience, personal experience. You figured out how you might be able to help people in similar circumstances, and ultimately, if you fast forward just a little bit in time, you became a holistic health coach.
Yeah.
And now you're also a health coach, correct?
Yeah, I'm a nutritionist at Whole Foods Market's Medical and Wellness Clinic, the one that's based at the global headquarters in Austin. And our clinical directors are Matt Letterman and Alona Polday from Forks Over Knives.
Yep.
So it is very much a plant-based clinic. And we have doctors who treat people's chronic disease and monitor medications and will prescribe medications. But you also have health coaches, amazing health coaches, like myself and the other health coaches. There's a center in Glendale and there's one in Austin. And we will gladly help you transition to a plant-based diet so that you never have to come back to our doors.
Sure.
I mean, look, we don't want you here for the rest of our lives and for the rest of your life. We don't want to see you forever. We would rather you come in for 3 months. We meet with you every 2 weeks. We help you transition to a plant-based diet. And then you never need to see us again because you've reversed your chronic disease and you are taking care of your health through the changes you made on your plate.
So I want you to think back, if you had an opportunity to, in your current role as a health coach, if you have an opportunity to go back to speak to that young man sitting on the couch,
Yeah.
who's surrounded by fast food wrappers at kind of a very, very low point in life, what would you say to that boy?
Well, here's the thing. The drug use, the fast food, the addictions I was dealing with, they're symptoms of an underlying issue. I would want him to know that when he's ready, the opportunity to completely take charge of your life is there, and that you're not going to be dependent upon anyone or anything else to do that, to get your life back. The other thing I highly recognize is that I'm very much grateful for everything that I went through. I'm grateful for the fact that for my addiction, for my depression, for my diseases, and for my overdose. Because in doing so, it helped me learn about just how precious of a gift this life is. And for me to say that I would go back and rob myself of that experience, I don't know if I would. It has really allowed me to understand the importance of the human-to-human connection, of family, of the simplicity of life and how beautiful it is. And I realize very much now that, yeah, I had a lot of issues. I was a diabetic. I was a drug addict. I had heart disease. I had depression. I had bipolar disorder, or chemically induced bipolar disorder. But none of those were my problem. I did not know how to live as an emotional or physical person. That's it. Those are my problems. The other things were just symptoms of those things. And until I figured out how to live properly as an emotional and physical person, I could substitute another substance for that. It could have been sex. It could have been gambling. It could have been heroin. It could have been whatever. Those weren't my problems. And I had to go through those really traumatic experiences to learn that those were my problems. And finally admitting that, man, I am really failing as a physical and emotional human right now. And This is the only way I know how to do it. To be an angry, entitled, arrogant person is the only way I knew how to live as an emotional person, because it protected my ego from really looking at who I was. The fast food, the drugs, that's the only way I knew to live as a physical person, because it made me feel anything other than how really sick and bad about myself I felt. And it's not working. I don't know any other way to do it. Luckily, Rip Esselstyn Engine 2 taught me another way of doing it. It was not easy at first, but I did it. It wasn't comfortable. I did it anyways, and my life got better. When I saw that change, I knew that I had to approach my emotional recovery in the same way. I had to go into my therapist and say, I'm sick of fighting you guys, because believe me, I was fighting them on a daily basis. I did not want to believe that I was an entitled, arrogant, spoiled person. And I walked in and said, this is it. This is all I know how to do. I don't know any other way of doing it. Tell me what to do. I'm not saying it's going to work, but let's just do it, because this is the only thing I know. And once I finally did that, once I finally surrendered, as they say, my life started to change as an emotional person. But yeah.
So you're taking your experiences to the next level, and you're actually giving back now to your brother as well, right?
Yeah.
So you guys are working together. Your twin brother, as you mentioned earlier. Are the obstacles, and what are you guys doing together? Because I know that from a health perspective, you were working with him to help him kind of get on the right path. And
so last January, not this year, of the year before, of 2016, he moved in with me in Santa Monica. He was he weighed 275 pounds. He was a type 2 diabetic. He was, on antidepressants, and just sort of hit a low point in his life. And I asked him, I said, are you happy, or are you content with where you are as an emotional person? Are you content with where you are physically? Are you happy? And he said no. And I made it very clear, like, I'm not at all talking about who you are as a person, because I love who you are as a person. But if you want to change the way that you live your life, I'd love for you to come move in with me for 6 months and live my lifestyle, my physical lifestyle, and just see what happens. And amazingly, he agreed. He moved in and he switched 100% plant-based day one. And he reversed his diabetes in a month. Matt Letterman took him off of his metformin day one. And it was great, because we went to go see him, and Matt asked him if he brought his medications, and he gives him this bag of medicine. Matt takes out the bag, he's looking, he goes, you don't need this, you don't need this, you don't need this, starts throwing stuff away. And Bobby's looking at me like, this guy's crazy. I'm like, no, you're fine, you'll be fine. And he's lost over 75 pounds. He's become, I think that it's great, because being a vegan has allowed him to have another outlet for his anger, because he's very much an angry vegan activist. And he's a filmmaker. Actually, currently right now, he's out filming a vegan travel show with some amazing women who are involved with Netflix. And their first episode is in Israel, and the second episode is going to be in Ireland. And and he wears all the shirts like, don't ask me where I get my protein, and I won't ask you where you get your cholesterol.
That's so great. So does he now that he's an expert, right? Does he call you out? Does he call you out when he feels like you're slipping in any way?
No, he doesn't. He just,
because you guys are twins. I'm sure there's a little bit of brotherly kind of warfare there.
There's insane twin competition. Are you kidding? I mean, like, the fact that he lost 50 pounds faster than I did was, I was like, okay, all right, slow up a little bit. No, the thing is, when it comes to the food, we're very much on the same page. Like, it doesn't need to be complicated. Like, I'm a very simple person. I've eaten oatmeal with cinnamon every single day for the last 5 years, every morning. Oatmeal with cinnamon. And at first it was broccoli and black beans and fruit. Now it is, okay, so I would never say that a plant-based diet is harmful to your health unless you get in between me and a sweet potato. Then you're putting your life in danger, my friend. I eat sweet potatoes, butternut squash, steamed greens, oatmeal and fruit, and cinnamon and fruit. That's what I eat every day, and I keep it simple. And so he's on the very much the same page. And so he and I will, when my mom's like, "Ooh, what about this recipe? What about this recipe? What about this recipe?" I'm like, "Well, why do we need to change anything?"
That's right. If it's not broke, don't fix it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we don't get on each other about the food, but he does. So, he says that he can't believe how much he despises the word protein now.
That's funny.
And he goes, "This is absurd. I can't stand this word anymore."
That's so funny. So Adam, you've been through so much in your life, and I really appreciate you sharing all the details again of the story. Is there anything that scares you?
Yeah. I'm very afraid of. Well, you know what I say. I still have some resentments. I resent the fact that I lost my 20s to drug addiction. I'm afraid that I do have some hypochondria. I'm afraid that the years I spent as an addict and very, very disease-ridden is going to come back and bite me in the ass someday. But, it's just, I think that stems from how much I value my health now. I'm afraid that, here's the thing. I'm afraid I'm not worthy of the amazing gift I've been given. And at some point I'm going to wake up and it's all going to be gone. I was a really, really, really horrible person. And there's a lot of times when I wake up and I feel like I'm undeserving of this. So for example, last year I got to go to Cleveland for an Engine 2 event, and Dr. Esselstyn and Ann Esselstyn had me stay at their place. And so I'm literally, it was exactly 4 years from my overdose. I went from being almost dead on the floor in my apartment surrounded by fast food garbage to having a sleepover party with Rip and his parents. This has got to be it, this has to be as good as it gets. And I feel so gifted every single day that I'm really afraid that tomorrow that's going to be the end of it. And I love so much what I have on a daily basis. That's kind of a fear, but it's irrational. So
let's talk about something. And I want to be respectful of your time also. So we're just a couple more questions if you don't mind. Yeah. So I want to come full circle with your dad also, because he clearly plays a central role in your progression through life, and it sounds as if your dad is such an amazing person for the way he kind of helped you through a lot of the things you've been going through. But you mentioned earlier your dad's a marathon runner, and I heard that you believe that one of the greatest things that you've gained throughout this entire process was the fact that you've had the ability to run with your dad now.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
So I started running as a form of meditation, and as a way to continue the experience of being comfortable, being uncomfortable, because that's what long distance running is. And so it allows me I have to be very much connected in what I'm doing at the moment. And that's what recovery is. If you're worried about what's going to happen tomorrow, then you're not being consciously aware of the choices you have to make in the moment. And with running, who cares where the finish line is? The only thing that is necessary to do is focus on your breath and take the next necessary step. That's it. So that's why I really love endurance sports. So I got into that, and then one morning I'm home visiting my folks. My dad wakes me up and goes, "I'm going to go for a run. You going to come?" And I just jumped out of bed. I put my running gear on. We go running. At that time we were doing a 10-mile course around Town Lake in Austin. We're going over this bridge, and neither of us are saying anything. We're just running with each other. And I had this surreal moment where I realized that I'm running with him because I want to be with him. And he asked me to run with him because he wants me to be with him. And he's been a solo runner for most of his life. And it's something that he's really passionate about. And he wanted me to experience it with him for no other reason than he wanted me with him. And it was like I've never been so in the moment in my life. And I didn't say anything. I just smiled and I watched him run. And then we just continued running. And I don't think I've ever enjoyed any moment in my life so much. Um, and I really believe that at that point, I was finally able to be with him and have him feel like he knew I was safe. And I think that at that point, he probably understood that he was never going to have to worry about getting a call that his son had died from a drug overdose. And it was an incredible experience. And yeah, like I said, it's maybe one of the best moments of my life was that one brief moment running over the bridge on Town Lake with my dad was just, and I remember it so clearly, and none of us said anything. It was just this moment of realization that was just unbelievable.
That's beautiful, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So, Adam, I just want to thank you again for being so open and honest and sharing your journey. And as I said at the top of the show, you've been a tremendous inspiration to me personally. And I know tons of people around the world see you as a beacon of what's possible. What you've gone through and what you continue to go through solidly represents the exact reason why I started this podcast in the first place. And the reason is, how do we take what might seem as these insurmountable obstacles, rebuild ourselves, and then inspire others to do the same for themselves? And you're really an amazing example of what's possible if we just put in the work every single day, regardless how difficult or challenging it may be at times. So thank you for what you've given the world so far, and I look forward to seeing the impact you're going to continue to make, and I truly hope that we can find ways to do some work together. So thank you so much, Adam.
Oh, thanks, Craig. I really, really appreciate it.
So I've got one final question for you.
Yeah,
what does it mean to you to be brave?
So I can't remember where I heard it defined this way, but bravery is not the absence of fear, but the ability to do what you know is right in the presence of fear. I am constantly dealing with fear of the unknown, because I never know what I'm doing. Like, I know what I want to be in life, but I don't know how to get there, right? So I'm constantly afraid that I'm going to make a wrong step. And the thing is that fear for me is an indication that I'm doing the right thing, because it's like Einstein said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting the same results. Well, if I'm comfortable doing the same thing over and over again, I'm just going to stay where I am. And bravery is, for me, the bravest thing I've ever done was recognizing that if I continued down this path that I was on, I was going to die, and I'm going to have to change everything about my life. And that no matter how far you fall, unless you die, you have not hit rock bottom. And at any point before that, you can turn around and make a comeback. There really is such a thing as a comeback, no matter how far you've fallen. You just have to get up and say, I'm not perfect. Toss your ego aside, turn around and fight. And I think that for anybody, there's no, like, my rock bottom is certainly not the farthest anyone has ever fallen, but it's the farthest I was willing to fall. And don't be ashamed of who you are, because the thing is that a lot of times we go through things in life and we do things in life that sort of hide who we really are. And we have to sort of accept that we're going to change everything about our lives to become our authentic self. And I think that bravery is being able to show up being vulnerable, and be vulnerable enough to show who you are in an authentic fashion, regardless of what anyone says or anyone thinks, and just be your true self. Because I think David Goggins said it. I don't know if you know Goggins.
Oh, sure, yeah.
When he says that if you can just get the rest of the world to shut up, stop listening to all that noise, shut off your internal thinking, and just be who you are authentically, then you can be great. And I think I totally just slaughtered how he actually said it. I'm sure I made it sound a lot worse than it actually is, but I think that is what it takes. I think that is true bravery, is not caring about what other people think, say, or do, and just being who you authentically are.
That's so great. Thank you, Adam.
Yeah.
So if you guys are interested in learning more about Adam or connecting with him, please head over to thebravestlife.com/006 and check out all the details on today's show and links to things we discussed in the show notes. You'll also find Adam's social media details in the show notes if you want to connect with him that way. Finally, I want to thank all of you for joining us for this episode of the Bravest Podcast. Even though we've only been at this for a short period of time, I'm proud to say we're seeing an amazing foundation of listeners developing. So thank you to those of you who are listening all over the United States, in South Africa, in the UK, in Japan, all over Europe, in Australia, and even beyond. If you like what we're doing here, please be sure to share this episode with someone you love. Again, the link for the episode is thebravestlife.com/006. We're also up on iTunes now, so if you're interested in leaving a review on what we've done so far, that would be a great place to share some positivity with anyone impacted by diabetes or anyone just trying to take life head on to create the healthiest version of themselves. Thanks again, everyone. I'm Craig, and we will catch you next time on the Bravest Podcast.